Hi there, and good evening, and welcome to the Jim Bohannon Show from Westwood One Radio. We're at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. Online, you'll find us at JimBohannonShow.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Jimbo Talks. And Republicans are gearing up for their turn on Saturday as the House impeachment managers are finishing up the final day of the opening arguments in the Senate impeachment trial of President Trump, with the latest in Washington, Camila Bernal.
After months of investigations and hours laying out their case, House Democrats are completing their opening arguments, and they're running out of time to convince Republican senators to vote for witnesses, so many of them still unmoved.
The managers for the House of Representatives have 7 hours and 53 minutes remaining.
In their final hours of floor arguments, the House impeachment managers focusing on the obstruction of Congress charge against President Trump.
President Trump tried to cheat, he got caught, and then he worked hard to cover it up.
But many in the Senate Republican majority are unconvinced.
I'm trying to do my job to be impartial, and I'm listening to both sides. But I think the House managers have done a poor job.
The GOP also seeking to blunt the call by Democrats for witnesses and subpoenas.
I've heard that the case is overwhelming, that they've made the case, and yet maybe they should have thought about that before they brought it over.
While Democrats work to persuade Republican colleagues to vote with them.
I've been reaching out to my Republican colleagues to see if they have questions, thoughts, want to discuss issues, and so far, I've not made any progress.
Senate Democrats say they want to hear real counter-arguments from the president's defense team up next.
I don't care to hear finger-pointing at the House and how they conducted an investigation. What I want to hear is their facts and circumstances to disprove what we've heard so far.
And tomorrow's session begins at 10 a.m. and then will run for several hours. The president's legal team will likely use Saturday, Monday, and Tuesday for their opening arguments, and they too get 24 hours. Reporting in Washington, I'm Camila Bernal. Back to you.
And so we'll talk about that tonight. Needless to say, by virtue of the fact that we have heard the same thing over and over and over again, there are other reasons why we have our guest on this evening. Sam Peters joins us. He is a retired major from the Air Force and a congressional candidate as well. He is running for the House to represent Nevada's 4th Congressional District in their June 9th Republican primary. We're going to be talking a bit about the impeachment situation, to be sure, and also about why there aren't more veterans in public office. So, again, I'm not sure that we have heard anything that necessarily promotes saying anything that we haven't said for the past several nights in a row. So we'll simply proceed as the topic allows us to do so, and also take a look at the issue of veterans running for public office. I happen to be a veteran. I've not run for public office, certainly, but nonetheless, I think the topic is an important one. Sam Peters, thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, my pleasure, and thank you for your service, sir. I appreciate you.
Thank you very much, and likewise, right back at you. First of all, you're running for the House in Virginia, the 4th Congressional District. I'm not that conversant with the districts in Nevada, but the bulk of them are in Clark County, that is to say right around Las Vegas. Is this one of those districts?
Well, the 4th congressional district for Nevada is the top third of the Las Vegas Valley, includes North Las Vegas, Northwest Las Vegas, and then it stretches into the rural areas and almost to Carson City on the west, and 6.5 counties in total.
Oh, very good. So it's one of the bigger districts. Like I said, Las Vegas. Nevada, like a number of western states, is largely a city state, if you will. Much of the population around Las Vegas, similar to Phoenix in Arizona, Salt Lake City in Utah, and so on. So I've got a better grip, I guess, on this particular district. It is said that Metro Las Vegas, much of the rural areas, I guess, of Nevada are pretty Republican. Metro Las Vegas varies, I guess, but I know that certainly Democrats are quite competitive in much of that region. What can you tell us about the 4th District?
Well, the 4th District has flip-flopped since its inception. It was born out of the 2010 census. A Democrat held it the first 2 years in 2012 to 14. Republican won in 2014. Held it, lost it to a Democrat, and then that Democrat stepped out, and the Democrat that won it the first time stepped back in, and the Republican who won it and beat him the first time had a rematch, and the Democrat took it. Why that was, we can argue, but the reality, the numbers show us that it's a D+3, so there are more Democrats, but the nonpartisan vote, and we've run the numbers a number of different ways. The nonpartisan vote will decide this election if everybody shows up. So
that's the key. Yeah, turnout. I know that there's been a trend away from veterans in public office, and part of that, of course, is simply a reflection of the fact that if you go back, say, to World War II, virtually every adult male was a veteran, and to a certain extent, the lack of veterans in public office is a reflection of the fact that we haven't had any major wars in that period of time. It's also, to a certain extent, a reflection of the fact that we ended the draft as well. But I note that in the Senate, the last time I looked, I think that there was something like 13% of the Senate was veterans. At one point, I know that figure in recent memory was about double that. The House in 1977, 80% of the House members were veterans. That number, the last time I checked, was 19%. For the presidency, of course, you can go back, say, just to World War II, and presidents Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, and H.W. Bush were all veterans. Since that time, with the presidencies of Bill Clinton, of George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump, of those 4 presidencies, the only military service is the Air National Guard service of President George W. Bush. Not to demean that, but it's simply, I note the fact that increasingly decisions in this country that often, especially at the federal level, often affect the security of the country, and people in uniform are increasingly being made by people who have never spent 1 second in a uniform. That bothers me.
As well it should. I mean, I did 20 years in the Air Force. I deployed to the Middle East 4 times. I Bronze Star out of Afghanistan. You know, if you're going to send the sons and daughters of America overseas to fight wars that we should or shouldn't be in, and that's another debatable topic. You should have a really close grasp on that decision and what it really means. When I was in Afghanistan, carrying the bodies of the caskets of flag draped caskets across the tarmac to repatriate our troops in that manner back to the United States. That's a significant responsibility, and I was honored to have it. Unfortunately, but having that experience, I have a really tight grasp on what it means and making those decisions, and I think the leaders of our country should have that.
Yeah. I'm not sure exactly the percentage of Americans currently who are military veterans. I know certainly that the greatest generation is dying rapidly. If you look at World War II, for example, except for those who may have lied about their age to get in early, assuming that you were 17 in 1945, that means that the youngest World War II veterans were born in 1928. So that means that the youngest, the babies of the World War II generation, were born this year. They will be 92 years of age. And therefore, they are disappearing. Likewise, then you go to, say, Korean veterans, for example, and you can look at the youngest Korean War veterans, and that takes you down to, I guess, it's roughly like, let's see here, born in 1953, so 45 would be, well, doing the math quickly in my head, 57, in their 80s. I'll put it that way. I'll do the math out later. But even the youngest Vietnam veterans were born back in a time that they're in their 60s right now. The bottom line is, for our major wars, we are talking about veterans who are getting extremely old. Obviously, we still have the veterans who served in the Gulf Wars. We have veterans who served in Afghanistan, Panama, and similar such conflicts. Nonetheless, as a percentage of the population, it's dropping, and this has bothered me a great deal over the years. That we increase, we do respect our veterans. I have seen and been a part of, for example, people in airports who have stood up at a group of the military walking through the airport, and I've applauded. But increasingly, we treat them, I think, as beloved mercenaries. We are so glad that they are willing to put their butts on the line for us. It's not a shared thing, and I think that's bad for the country.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. And to add to the point of the number of veterans serving in Congress, the end strength, since I went in the military in 1992, the end strength year over year was on a decline. Every year it was a matter of dropping end strength and doing more missions and more activities with fewer personnel. So at this time I don't know that the end strength numbers now. I've been out for a little bit, but we're a smaller almighty force. And, that plays into the number of people who are serving. So, it's a dangerous thing that we have when we don't have people leading the country in the Senate and House that don't have a lot of experience and know what to do with the power they have.
Yeah, I have indeed on occasion certainly voted for non-veterans, and increasingly, of course, sure. I have no other choice. And I wouldn't say that I would vote for a veteran over a non-veteran in every instance. However, it is a strong tiebreaker for me. I did that math. And for those who haven't kept track of this, the youngest World War II veterans are 92 this year. The youngest Korean War veterans, the kids, are 84 this year. The youngest Vietnam veterans are 74 this year. So, again, we're just talking about a serious difference in terms of the time that's involved here. We're going to come back and take some calls for our guest. He is Major Sam Peters, retired from the Air Force. He's running for Congress from Nevada in the Republican primary, and we'll be talking about impeachment as well as the need for more people who have served their country to serve again in a different capacity. We'll be back in a moment.
Now that we have carefully reviewed the facts and have described the President's categorical obstruction of Congress, we address questions of law. This discussion need not be abstract. The President's obstruction impacts the Senate directly. It impacts the constituents you represent. It impacts you. Because your job as a member of Congress is to hold the executive branch in check. This is true no matter who occupies the White House or which party controls the House or Senate. And the further the President, any President, departs from the law and the Constitution, the more important it is for you to do your job.
Jerry Nadler, the House impeachment manager, in his remarks this past day as the Democrats ended their tedious opening comments in this entire case. 1-866-50-JIMBO, our number 1-866-505-4626. Your thoughts about the impeachment process to date, in particular, Major Sam Peters, and if you wish as well, those particular remarks by Jerry Nadler.
Yeah, talking about the law, it's fun. It's interesting that we're talking about impeaching a president for high crimes and misdemeanors, and no crime or misdemeanor has taken place. I mean, they've been after the president for 3 years now. They spent the last months trying to develop articles of impeachment, and the best they could come up with were 2 articles that don't fit the profile of federal crimes. So, where do we go from here? If it's me and it's I get my way, the Senate holds the president's team tomorrow makes a motion to dismiss, and the Senate accepts it, and we move on and get back to the business of the people. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, as we get ready to take some calls for you here, I have thoughts on that. In that I am not in any hurry. I don't want any Democrat running for public office at any level to be able to go to November saying, "Well, we certainly tried to get this crook, and they covered it up." I want witnesses right, left, and sidewise. John Bolton. Fine. I want to hear both Bidens. I want to hear the whistleblower, and I want to hear from Adam Schiff. And by the way, there is precedent for that. Robert Barr, the prosecution manager from the Clinton case, was at one point questioned in that particular case. I just would rather hear a ton of witnesses, and if it disrupts the Democrats' primary schedule for president, well, boo-hoo. They're the ones who wanted this. That would be my assessment. I'm just curious about in response.
Well, that's one of the ways it could go, and if it does, putting Adam Schiff on the stand and making him spend a few days there is something that I think all of us could enjoy after what he's put us through. It's standing on the congressional floor reading a fake transcript and then just blowing past it, never hearing about it again. That's troublesome for me. And one of the reasons I'm going after this congressional seat that I am to bring some integrity back to the floor of the House. The things that have been happening over the last few years are just it's an abhorrent abuse of office, and it's just disgusting. Frankly, around the world, and I'm sorry, but around the world, people watch us. And I've been overseas in a number of different places, and people watch what's going on in the United States. And when the people who are representing us in Washington are doing these type of things and just charading for as long as they have, it makes us like a banana republic, and we're not.
Yes. No, we are not. This is JD, who calls in from Henderson, Nevada this evening. I'm not sure if that would make him a potential constituent or not, but good evening, JD.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Major Peters. We met at the, I'm looking at your card right now, father, husband, business owner, leader, employer, veteran, coach, Rotarian, and patriot. I met you a few months ago at the hotel when the Republicans had our meeting down there. Unfortunately, I'm at District 3. I can't vote for you, but I have been talking you up to everybody. And, Jim, by the way, I met Sebastian Gorka and Gallagher, and I was looking for you, Sam, at Stoney's Monday. They had a brouhaha there, and it was a nice meeting. And the only problem is, and you know this probably better than anybody, Jim. I think you got about 7 or 8 opponents in the primary. The Republicans in this state seem to form a circular firing squad when we choose to run for office. And as far as I'm concerned, Sam, you're the best of the lot. I met one of the gals that's running at that Stoney's thing. She's running, and she's a wildcatter, I think. But we just shoot ourselves in the foot, and I hope our chairman, Michael McDonald, would exercise a little bit of authority and thin the herd a little bit. What say you?
Well, JD, first of all, I remember meeting you. Thank you for calling in. Unfortunately, you can't vote for me, but I will, like the rest of the listeners outside of the district, when I'm in Congress, I will vote for you, and I'll represent you in the best possible way I can. And that's part of the goal here. As far as Stoney's, I was actually there, standing in the back, and I watched the event, and it was a great event. Sorry we didn't bump into each other there. And I appreciate your comments about me being the best of the lot. There are approximately 9 people at this point who have thrown their hat in the ring for this particular seat. To that end, as far as the Republican Party is concerned, they're kind of struck by their bylaws to not get involved until after the primary. And on one hand, it is potentially shooting yourself in the foot, but at the other hand, it does allow the voters to make their choice. And it's incumbent on the people running like myself to get out and make sure that I'm out there.
We're coming up on a break that doesn't move. We'll be back in a moment.
You heard their case? But you know what it really comes down to? When I just listened to Manager Jeffries at the end there, I was really trying to remove the president from the ballot in 2020. We are, 10 and a half months out from an election? and they don't trust the American people to make a decision.
Legal counsel for President Trump, Jay Sekulow, in remarks that are a part of the ongoing trial of the president in the United States Senate. We're speaking with a congressional candidate in Nevada running for Congress in the 4th District there, retired Air Force Major Sam Peters. And we can talk both about veterans in public office and, of course, the ongoing impeachment drama. This is Sharon in Crane, Missouri. Hello, Sharon.
Hello, Jim, and hello, Major Peters. First of all, thank you to you and every veteran, past and present, that has served in the military of the United States of America, because it is not just a thanks for your service, it's a thanks for the freedom that I have. It's very humbling to an individual to know that people are willing to die so that you can live your life the way you want to. I do not take it for granted. I would like to see this country, and I don't know if it'll ever happen again, but I'd like to see the country go back to a mandatory 2-year service, whether it's in the military or as backup of some way of serving the country, so that maybe young people coming up in the world will have an idea of what it means to serve the country. I'd like to know your opinion, sir.
I'll tell you what, I mentioned this last night at an event where the Texas Commissioner of Agriculture, Sid Miller, who's an advisor to President Trump on agriculture for Texas, he's endorsed our campaign, and I made a comment in my comments last night. There is an accountability issue in our country, no question about it, and it goes from all the way from our elected officials down to Joe Citizen, and it's one of those things where we may never know how good we don't know how good we have it until it's gone, and I've seen that overseas. I've seen what the other side of a country looks like, and we really are. The United States, it really is the last bastion of freedom in the world, and people know it, and that's why they want to come here so badly. That's the immigration problem we have, and all of that. As far as a mandatory 2-year draft, I hope it never comes to that, and it takes away our volunteer force, because our volunteer force, when people do stand up on their own and take that service on, it really is a special thing. I think we can do a better job as a society pointing people in that direction of service versus selfless. Or self, you know what I mean?
I could easily see what Sharon was mentioning in depending on the nation's needs, service in the uniformed military, in the health service, the Peace Corps, whatever. But I would note, in fact, I have no problem with, for example, let's say letting people who are so drafted serve as maybe backup, people who can do things like kitchen police and stacking warehouses and clerical and the like, and let the point of the spear continue to be manned and womaned by volunteers. I have no problem with that at all. But it goes to me beyond the needs of the military. It goes to the needs of the country. People in this country ought to have it abundantly clear that they owe something back. So in one form or another, I would like that myself. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree that we have I would like to see also the people in the country have the mindset that they need to give back. I don't think that should be forced on people. I believe that people through parenting, through education, and the like, people should want to volunteer. People should want to get involved in their community. People should want to get involved in this political process and keep our country the free state that it is, and the beacon of freedom for the world. But it's incumbent on those that know that to teach the younger ones, and I think that's what might be where we're lacking.
Well, certainly we should have that attitude, no question about it. Here's a call from Jamie in Monette, Missouri. Hello, Jamie.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you for your radio show, and I'm very appreciative of your guest. One thing I like about you, Mr. Bohannon, is the fact that when you do bring up your military service and you talk about your life then you don't chastise the chain of command. You don't really dog the military and bring it in a negative way. And I think that's what the military people used to be like that got out of the military, is they had a deep respect. And I was just wondering with your guest tonight, as a military person and not a politician, what do you think about Mayor Pete and some of the things he's said about areas that he served, and now in such a negative way? How do you feel about that?
Can you give me a specific on some of the things he said?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what all he has said. I do know that there are currently, to my knowledge, two of the Democrats currently running, Pete Buttigieg and Tulsi Gabbard, are veterans. But Jamie, I don't recall specifically what he said. Go ahead.
Yeah, in one of the debates, he was joining right in there with our socialist friends on the Democratic side about how Iraq, we had no business being there, how the way that we deploy our people and the way we put them into these areas of conflict, we shouldn't. He wasn't supportive of what our president did in dealing with Iran recently, which I think was above and beyond what anyone expected, and I'm glad he did it. I think it was a brilliant move on his part. But when listening to Mr. Mayor Pete, he has nothing good to say about some of these great monumental things that our president has done so far militarily. And I'm just wondering, you as a military person, when you see the achievements of Trump and then you hear dog him about that, what do you think about that?
All right, very good. Let's let our guest respond to that.
Yeah, I can respond to a lot of that directly. The things the president is doing, as you mentioned, are incredible. Standing up and getting the things accomplished that he's doing, again, in the face of the Congress that he's supposed to be working with. He's just an incredible. As far as what Mayor Pete, going against the president, it's part of the political gamesmanship that's going on in our country right now. He's running for the Democrat platform. Everything he says is going to be against what the president is doing. And I'm with you. The president taking out Soleimani has been killing Americans for a long time. And he's been, there's a UN resolution. There was a UN resolution for him not to leave Iran. He left Iran and was traveling the Middle East extensively, in Syria, and undermining what we were trying to do over there. And again, killing Americans. So him leaving this earth in the manner which he did, good on President Trump. Pulling out of Syria, when the president pulled troops out of Syria, the Democrats immediately erupted. How dare he? How dare he? How dare he? I was on the side of the president immediately, finally getting them out of there. What was impressive about that entire thing, everybody was so engaged in the fact that he was pulling out the troops. They didn't pay attention to what was actually going on, and taking out Baghdadi 2 weeks later. Absolutely brilliant by the president.
More to come. Back in a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show. There are currently 96 veterans serving in Congress. That's out of 535 members. This is down 6 from the previous Congress and marks a sharp decline in the number of veterans serving in Congress since the 1970s. Many veterans who went on to serve as president or run for president served in Congress, and yet lately the number of veterans running for Congress has declined. And as we go back to more calls here, Major Sam Peters, I'm curious why you think that might be.
Why we've got so few veterans in Congress?
And running for Congress. The number has declined recently, yes.
Yeah, so the numbers currently in Congress, it's a smaller military. There's a smaller pool. You mentioned it earlier, the older generations of World War II and Korea and Vietnam, they're passing, and they're enjoying their retirement. So, and as far as the current running for Congress, it's difficult. We've been at a state of constant conflict since, at least 1990, 30 years ago. So, leaving that environment when you've deployed a number of times and it's been a very rigorous, ops tempo, and going into a political environment, this is just another kind of war. I mean, we're battling out here for votes and trying to do the right thing for the country. But it's a difficult venture, no doubt about it.
1-866-50-JIMBO as we turn to Michael in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Good evening, Michael, and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Jim. I don't know, Major, if you heard the third hour of Jim's program last night, but I thought he gave an excellent profile of the dictator in Russia, Vladimir Putin. And so I have two questions for you. You said that President Trump has not committed any misdemeanors, and I'm wondering, as a veteran, do you consider that while thousands of our allies are dying in the field against the Russian dictator Putin, our Ukrainian allies, thousands of them, more than 10,000, up to 15,000 now, do you think it's not a misdemeanor for the President of the United States to withhold funds already approved by the Congress to help that ally?
First of all, the funds went through. Let me just take note of that. The funds were given, and this president actually offered weaponry. All Barack Obama offered was MREs, meals ready to eat, and blankets, and withheld any military funds. So based on that reasoning, I suppose we should retroactively impeach Barack Obama, but I'll defer to Major Peters.
I'll make it a quick answer. You nailed it, Jim. No, I don't think it's a misdemeanor because it's not U.S. Enforcing Ukraine's defense is not a requirement under U.S. law. The money was dispersed, as Jim said. No, I don't think it's a misdemeanor.
All right, to Ken in Pittsburgh. And Ken, good evening and welcome to the Jim Bohannon Show.
Good evening, and both of you, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I have a question. I'm a veteran, and I don't have health insurance. Why does this country give free health insurance to illegal immigrants and poor people and not their own veterans?
Well, certainly, yes. Go ahead, Major. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's a great question, and I'll tell you what. When I'm in Congress, we will take care of our veterans well before we take care of illegal immigrants.
We've heard an awful lot of discussion on this program over the years in a variety of contexts, variety of issues about our treatment of veterans. The main thing I have drawn from it is that it seems to be rather inconsistent. For example, in talking of health care at VA centers, and I get calls from people, well, I went to the Smith VA Center and they're wonderful. And then somebody else will chime in, yeah, Smith is tremendous. And then we'll get 2 or 3 calls about the Jones VA Center that's terrible. So again, just going from the anecdotal evidence that I run across on this program, it sounds like the problem of veteran care is very localized. Some places are great and some aren't.
It is. It's localized, and there's an HR issue in federal service on the civilian side. It takes there's a large gap in very many places, a large gap of the number of nurses, for instance, that the hospital or clinic has on the VA side, because it's an incredibly long hiring process. And a nurse can go down the street to a civilian hospital and be employed 2 days later, where it'll take 3, 4, 5, 6 months for them to be hired by the federal government, and that's part of the issue. And a doctor that's come out of medical school and needs to pay student loans, they're not going to sit around and wait 6 months to get on with the VA. So there's a lot of work to be done, and you're right, it's a very localized issue. I have in my district, there are a number of areas that are considered rural, with a large population of veterans that have to travel a significant distance to get to VA care, which again creates additional problems. So it is localized, and there are problems that can and will be addressed, and there are solutions for them. We just have to be a little more creative than we've been in the past.
One quick follow-up to that. The notion of vouchers. First of all, I have never had need for VA medical facilities, so there's that caveat I'll add. I haven't been there. But to me, it would seem to me that for many veterans, for an ailment that is not specifically military-oriented, that it would be better for them to have a voucher to go to their local hospital and have to travel several hundred miles to some regional center.
Agreed. No question about it. And there's rules on where a veteran can go to get care and be covered by the VA, just like any of the major medical health plans. They have rules on what they can do. And I think for veterans, assuredly, those rules need to be addressed and likely loosened in many cases.
All right, very good. Back in a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show. 1-866-50-JIMBO, our number. Our guest is retired Air Force Major Sam Peters, and he's retired after the year 2013 is when he retired after spending time in Afghanistan, Iraq, Panama, Korea, and various installations in the U.S. He earned a Bronze Star for his duty in Afghanistan. As we take a call now from Michael in Janesville, Wisconsin, a listener to WCLO Radio. And hello, Michael. Welcome.
Thanks for taking my call. I wanted to know, we've got a couple questions from Major Peters. If he's running for Congress, I think he owes the people who intend to vote for him some straight answers. And what I would like to know from Major Peters is the recent attack that killed the loser general from Iran, who definitely deserves to die. We were lied to about that. We were completely lied to about the fact that we had 11 casualties, and we were lied to about it. And now today we find out we have 35 more of our troops. Some of these guys could be my friends, and Major Peters' friends, okay? And we were lied to, and we were told today that there's 35 of our troops with traumatic brain injury, okay? And they're giving out all these excuses about, oh, well, it's after the fact, blah, blah, blah. What I want to know from Major Peters, to give a straight answer to the people who are going to vote for him, is what is he going to do about the fact that we're being lied to about the number of casualties that are being occurred under this administration?
Well, in one particular instance, there was some misreporting that occurred. I am not aware of whether there was a, quote, lie or whether misinformation went up the chain of command. So I'll simply defer to the Major in that regard. I'm not aware that there's been some systematic misstating of casualties, and what was first reported, I guess, as minor concussions turned out to be more than that. But you tell me. I haven't heard any indication that this was a, quote, lie, other than it was simply a misreporting.
I believe the question is, what am I going to do when I'm elected to make sure the American people are not being lied to? I think that's the essence of the question. And the reality of it is, when I'm elected, I will make sure that there is some integrity in Congress. As I mentioned earlier in the show, I will make sure that the people that are voting for me are represented as the Constitution, indicates. It starts off as we the people, and that's the representation that they send to Washington should represent we the people. So, and I'll do so with integrity. I think that's the best we can do as a straight answer for that question.
Fair enough. To Casey in Great Falls, Montana. Good evening.
Good evening. Yeah, I wanted to say that I can take your position, Jim, on the draft. Having been one of the last batches of draftees that went into the Army, spent one tour in Vietnam. I hated the concept at the time, but did a world of good for me, and I think it's also good for the country that we have some type of service. And the other thing, one last thought. It seems that when people are draftees or citizen soldiers, like the Founding Fathers visioned, they have more of a stake in the country, and their parents do, and their relatives in the broader footprint in the society.
All right. Thoughts? We've got about 20 seconds, Major.
I agree. When people have a stake in the action they're taking, they do it much more effectively. I agree with that comment, absolutely.
Right. We have more to come, so stay with us on the Bohannon Show. And Major Peters, please stay on the line. We'll speak off air again. Sam Peters, retired major from the U.S. Air Force and running for Congress from Nevada's 4th District in the June 9th Republican primary there. And we've got more to come on the Bohannon Show, so stay with us. I'm Jim Bohannon, and of course we come to you weeknights here at Westwood One. Hi there and good evening and welcome to the Jim Bohannon Show from Westwood One Radio. We're at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. Online, you'll find us at JimBohannonShow.com and you can follow me on Twitter at Jimbo Talks. We're talking with a retired Marine Corps Colonel, Mike Hudson. He is the Senior Director of Government Solutions at Clear Force. We'll learn more about that as well. And we're talking a bit about a situation that has certainly bothered many people in this country. Obviously, mass shootings are a problem that this country must address. And in particular, of course, mass shootings at military bases. And one thing that we have learned in that is that apparently at most military bases, at least stateside, that people who are, of course, trained in the use of weaponry are not allowed to carry them on post. And in some cases, this has probably led to the loss of life among our service personnel. So I wanted to talk a bit about that with Colonel Hudson as we welcome him to the Jim Bohannon Show. Thank you for being with us.
Hey, good evening, Jim. How are you?
Good evening. Fine, thank you, and thank you very much for your service. Much appreciated. I wanted you to ask your thoughts about that. I mean, I know from my time, which was back in the Jurassic era, so things certainly can change, but certainly stateside, I was at, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 bases stateside, and we did not, as a matter of course, carry weaponry. In Vietnam, that, of course, was much different. Even when we were back at the base camp, we tended to carry our weapons around a great deal. Then again, when I was in, I don't remember ever hearing of a single instance of a gunman just trying to run around and shoot up military personnel either. So I'm wondering your thoughts about what is apparently a policy of denying people who, again, are trained. Some of them are not, of course, proficient up to the minute, but people who have all been trained in the use of firearms not being allowed access to them on post.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit on it. Your experience, I think, is still germane to today. So combat, you're deployed downrange or in an area where there is potential hostile actors. Absolutely, you'll be carrying a weapon, most likely a handgun or a sidearm. And even when you carry a weapon, there's certain levels of which you can have the weapon, right? They call them conditions. Yeah. So if you think that, right, so is there are there live rounds actually in a magazine in the weapon? So are you a condition 1 weapon, round chambered, ready to go, or all the way down to a condition 4 weapon where you carry the weapon, but there's no magazine inserted into it. You carry that in a pouch on your person. So I think that's absolutely the right way to think about it, and they set those based on the threat conditions at the time. Yeah. And then as it relates to being back here in the U.S., I think the policy is, as you said, at least in my experience, is that there's not a requirement to carry a weapon while you're on post, unless, of course, you're training with it or going to the range to qualify with it.
But, of course, the other side of the coin from that is a prohibition on carry. And, for example, I'm wondering what the military position is, or in your view ought to be, regarding, let's say, if you wish, concealed weapons carry, this sort of thing, or open carry, if you will. I mean, civilians are allowed to do this. And again, everybody in the military, to my knowledge, undergoes, at least in their basic training, boot camp or whatever, they undergo weapons training. They may not use that weapon again, but at least they have been so trained. And I'm wondering why there would necessarily be a prohibition this way, given the fact that you can never know if a given military installation will be subject to someone trying to shoot the place up. Granted, it's not a day-to-day threat, but it happens.
Yeah, I think what you have to think about it through the lens of the base itself, and start kind of with that perspective. So the military has different threat conditions that they would put the base on, and then they have these things called RAM, which are random access measures that they kind of constantly change around. And the other thing you have to consider is that there is an armed guard force already on the base. So if you think about the last time you went to a military base in the D.C. area, I mean, the people that are checking your IDs, even letting you get into the perimeter, are armed. And then even behind them, there's a second or a third layer of armed police. And I think and then you have a reaction force that could easily respond very quickly if there was a requirement for that. I just think the challenge of having everybody that comes onto a military base, active or not, walking around carrying a weapon, I mean, I think you have the same risk you'd have if everybody was walking around, outside your house carrying a weapon. I just think it's a risk that the military has looked at and says, hey, we've got it covered with our current security postures.
Yeah. In terms of security in general at military bases, as a retired colonel, you've had a lot more experience than I had with one 4-year time in the Army a long time ago. Your thoughts about security on military bases in general, does it strike you as adequate?
Yeah, I do. It's been my experience, and I've moved around quite a lot, so I've been on mostly Marine Corps bases, some naval bases. I've trained on Army and Air Force bases. And my experience has been that absolutely they take a very serious look at a defense in depth type posture. So it's not just, they use technology as it relates to observing threats. They have sophisticated entry and access control measures. You'll see with the use of dogs and other type of roving patrols, and then the armed response force we talked about earlier. So I think that the bases themselves make themselves a hard target for an outside bad actor. And if someone should penetrate the perimeter and move within inside, I think they have a very quick reaction force that can move within that. And the other thing I would say, we also get, even in the military, something that you see a lot of companies do, is that we have training for active shooter, what to do if someone within the base starts going off with a weapon, how you should respond, what you should do to help coordinate a reaction and keep you and your friends out of harm's way.
What is Clear Force, and the website, by the way, clearforce.com? What is that?
Yeah, so Clear Force, what we do is we take a look at the risk on the people side, and we do it through a couple of lenses, one of which is straight up wellness in the sense, I think what you were talking about earlier in the show about individuals who might do bad things. And what we do is we take a look at external drivers and pressures that take place away from the workplace. So we have a discovery tool to say, hey, these are individuals that potentially are doing bad things or under a great deal of pressure, say through criminal or financial or legal issues that might put them under pressure that the organization might want to be aware of. And then what you see is the data supports that most individuals who act out in the workplace, hazing, harassing, or what we're talking about here, potentially worse would be violence, they tend to do activities outside of the workplace and bring those in. So we look for that and then allow an organization to have a single digital environment to understand that risk, bring in their own current monitoring capability or employee wellness or awareness tools if they have cyber monitoring, HR reporting, and things, to allow an organization in real time to become aware of individuals at elevated risk. The goal is to engage with the individual before to have a better outcome than waiting them to get to a place where they think their only solution is for them to do bad things in the place. We underwrite all of that with legal compliance, which we think is equally as important, right? Protect the rights of everybody involved in the process to make sure that privacy, Fair Credit Reporting Act, EEOC, those things are all provided. So I think you find a much better trusted environment, and we think that's very helpful to organizations today.
It strikes me as a very important process and also a very tricky process in all likelihood, that certainly it should be approached, but very carefully. I can recall at a job I had many years ago, there was one individual who was intensely high-strung. And I remember thinking at the time, this was before you routinely had cases of shooters at places of employment, but I remember thinking that if I was ever going to work and I heard that there was an active shooting at my place of employment, this would have been the guy I would have first thought of. Well, I later had a chance to run across this person years later. He had matured. He was young at the time. And I got to talk to some people about how he was doing. And he was a picture of mellow, professional, good colleague behavior. And I remember thinking that I may have too quickly judged the individual just because he did seem to have, perhaps it was a youthful hair trigger of a temper. In other words, perhaps I was prepared to judge him too harshly. So what you do at Clear Force is obviously important, but I do think that there is a potential for abuse here if, for example, somebody reports somebody else, maybe, there could be a personal grudge involved or something of that nature. So how do you approach this kind of proactive effort at a safe workplace in a fair manner?
That's a really good question and a way to think about it. So just because someone is under some deal of pressure, or you get, say, some reporting, as you just described, the organization has to have a way to acknowledge that. And then, okay, well, let's take a look at it. And that's why I said earlier about you have to have this built-in automation. So you take a look at organizational policy and you automate the guardrails that protect the individual. So one is you just can't say, hey, I don't like Jim today, and I think Jim's acting strange, and I think you ought to fire Jim. Clearly that the organization would say, well, if someone's concerned about Jim, let's take a look broadly. Is there any other indicators? Can you see holistically what could be going on that? And then maybe you discover some indicators that go, hey, maybe he's under a great deal of pressure. So maybe what we need is just simple a conversation with Jim. Ideally, the goal is to pick up on early indicators of risk that don't necessarily say this is a bad person, but bring those into the company and then have a back-end process that says, okay, how do we understand this risk in context? And then if it have triggers along the way that say, hey, maybe we need to engage with that person early and you can have a better outcome. I think that's kind of the key today is what tragically tends to happen on the back end. People can always put the puzzle together and say, geez, we had all these early indicators, but nobody put them in a single place. Nobody understood them holistically, and that individual ends up doing something bad or potentially even hurting themselves. Last time we were talking about veteran suicide, and one of the challenges there was how you miss these early indicators of a struggling person, and you just think it's all good, and it turns out that person had a lot more challenges, and if you would have engaged sooner, you might have had a different outcome.
We'll talk some more when we come back on the Jim Bohannon Show with our guest in this portion of the program, retired Marine Corps Colonel Mike Hudson, 1-866-50-JIMBO. Back in a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO. It may seem odd to be concerned about the security of people who are officially trained and armed, but in point of fact, that doesn't mean that people who serve this nation in uniform are immune from such worries. Far from it. Our guest is retired Marine Corps Colonel Mike Hudson. He's now Senior Director at clearforce.com. Let's go to Ed, who calls in from Cullman, Alabama, on the Jim Bohannon Show. And Ed, good evening and welcome to the program. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Jim. And Colonel, I'm really not trying to be disrespectful. I appreciate everything you've done for this country and everything you've given. But as far as protection, if you take the small amount of space that our military bases have been, or that cover, and the amount of shootings, active shootings that has happened on them, this whole idea of one hand washing and making everything all fine and dandy and Humpty Dumpty for everybody, it just don't seem to be working. You have several well-trained military men and women that you will hand a firearm to and send them into battle, but you won't let them carry one on base. I mean, there's been so many people, we've had terrorists come into our military bases, train, and then disappear into the country. I don't think it's left wing. A lot of this stuff seems to me it's just left wing. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. It just.
Well, all right. I think we understand the thrust of your comment. I don't know that ideology enters into it, but for the record, Colonel Hudson, your take on the advisability of not allowing people to carry personal weapons, let's say, on a military base.
Yeah. So I think Ed's question kind of goes back to Jim, what you kind of opened with earlier. Should we arm every individual in uniform in a military base? Well, first thing, a military base is a small city, so. There are people clearly there that are in the armed forces, but then there's also housing on a lot of our military bases. There'll be hospitals, schools, daycare facilities. And so you will have a lot of non-military personnel that could be wives, dependents, guests of the base, as well as other units that are training. So I think one of the challenges you think about it, it's not everybody's going to be on base, will be wearing a uniform, will have access to a service weapon. I think as I said earlier, think the way the military thinks about this, at least the way I would think about this, is you have a layered defense. You'll have police that are armed. You'll have reactionary forces that are armed. At areas where there needs to be additional levels of security, you will find armed response forces as well. And I think that's the right way to think about it than just welcome to your military base. Here's the key to your room, and here's a 9mm and some ammunition, and continue to do about your business. Go shopping in the commissary. Go shopping. I think it puts a lot of more risk in play than it would address broadly.
All right, Doug in Avon, Minnesota, next. And good evening, Doug.
Good evening, Jim. Good evening, Colonel. Thank you for your service, both of you. My question kind of plays off what you talked about a little bit before with Jim and with Ed, the previous caller, about military bases. But my question centers around, we've heard some of these active shooters on military bases have become what they call radicalized. Is there some way that the military is stepping up efforts to background check every person that comes in, whether it's on their social media pages or whatever they can, thoroughly, to try and figure out if these people may be a threat as they're being recruited and they're going through basic training, as opposed to letting them work up through the ranks? And are they also, as people are in the military for any amount of time, doing background checks on them constantly to see if something suddenly changes in their social media profile or their personnel profile?
Yeah, I think that raises a really valuable point. I'm happy that we help out with nations who are ostensibly our allies, even though that could be called into question. But there simply has been too prominent a pattern here to simply pretend that there's no problem for fear that some ally or alleged ally might be offended by profiling. The hell with that. If we need to set standards that involve the safety of our forces, then so be it. Said ally doesn't have to send their forces here for training if they don't like it, would be my take, Colonel.
Yeah, I think both of you are onto the right target, and I think I've seen recently where the Secretary of Defense has said that they're actually going to increase or enhance some of the continuous vetting that they do. I think we have to think about this broadly. I mean, yes, the military is a concern without a doubt, but think organizationally. This goes back to that earlier conversation about the detection of the drivers of stress or risk. So if you think someone is being driven by, say, jihadist or terrorist ideology, that's outside pressure that's coming in. Do you see that sooner? And in the case of the shooting down in Pensacola, I understand that second lieutenant had hit jihadist websites, also had hit some pornography sites, might have been some child pornography sites. So there was an activity footprint that said this person at the very least should have been engaged in a conversation. That goes back to the earlier part, Jim, we talked about. When you see these behaviors or you see events in real time that say, hey, these are things that are either A, against policy, or B, violate the company, the organization's rules or regulations, that person doesn't mean they're going to be a bad person and shoot the place up, but it clearly means that you ought to focus your resources early and discover what's going on with that. And specific to the military, I think that's exactly right. I mean, we do that today. If you're issued a security clearance, as you know, you went through yours, Jim, you probably were issued a secret clearance. What they do today is they're shifting from this time-based model to more of an event-based model. And I think that's the way we need to think about it, both inside the military and out. What are we doing to become aware of individuals who have potential activities in real time? And a lot of those, by the way, as we just talked about, take away, they're not on base, right?
No, exactly. Now, we're coming up on a break that doesn't move. I want to finish your thought on that when we come back in just a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. Retired Marine Colonel Mike Hudson is our guest, Senior Director of Government Solutions at clearforce.com, a security company that he described earlier to us. 1-866-50-JIMBO is our number as we talk of issues related to security on base and the welfare of America's military personnel. To William in Topeka, Kansas next. Good evening, William.
Good evening, yeah. How are you doing?
We're well, thank you.
Yeah, is that better?
Yes, that's much better. Go right ahead. You're on the radio.
Yes, I'm a veteran. I was an MP in the military back in the 80s and 90s. I was stationed over in Europe, in Germany, and stationed here in stateside.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people ought to be allowed to carry on military bases. You know, maybe go through a better background check. But I know as being an MP, I know in Germany there was only 4 people on duty at one time. So that's a lot of area to cover with just 4 people, 2 of us on the gate and 2 on patrol. We actually had terrorist activity. We had a couple trucks blown up. The German police actually ran a terrorist up on our post and arrested them on our post. In Germany, they're called barracks, but then, I've trained at Leavenworth and Fort Riley. I was stationed at Fort Polk. Those are huge amounts of land, and you have very few police officers or military police that patrol those areas. So there's a big open stance for people to come on base to do whatever they want to.
Before Colonel Hudson responds to you, I'd like to ask you about one thing, and that is that I was in military intelligence, and I certainly qualified on actually initially on the M14 and then later on the M16, and had to periodically requalify, but very periodically, and I mean it was quite infrequent. Mostly, I think that the people in this country who are allowed to, let's say, carry permits must meet some kind of training standard. And it would occur to me that even people in the military who have been initially trained, if we were to allow this, that it might be beneficial to have them treated almost as civilians. In that, if you're going to carry, you would have to let's say qualify more than I had to, certainly. I mean, I would not have been happy with me being as part of a defense force, let's say, carrying, let's say, a rifle at the bases I was at, because my work day to day was not at all carrying a weapon. I would have needed to requalify. So your thoughts about that, William?
Yeah, I agree with you, because most military people aren't trained in handguns. It's all rifles.
I never touched a 45 ever. I mean, I strictly was with rifles, strictly that and an M79 grenade launcher. But that's not really part of this discussion. I don't think anybody's going to be packing those stateside. But
and MPs,
yeah,
and MPs, we trained. We had to go to the range at least twice a year, if not more.
Yeah.
But I know nowadays a lot of bases don't have regular MPs anymore. They don't
have any MPs.
Well,
really?
I know for a fact here in Topeka, the National Guard facilities are all
guard facilities. Yeah,
they're guarded by contracted security.
Yeah, guard
now.
Facilities. I suspect that's certainly true. Regular military bases, I would assume, have military police or shore police or something of the other. But just wanted to get that clarification. Colonel Hudson, your take on what William and I have just talked about.
Yeah, so I think that a couple things come to mind real quick. There is always going to be a significant amount of space on a military installation that's being covered by the Guard force. But he also mentioned something I thought was very interesting and true. Even here in the U.S. or overseas, there will always be an additional armed response capability from the environment. So in the case of Germany, it was the police force there. If you pick a military base, sort of the local authorities as well, there's a relationship. But one of the things that I'm sure, William, you'd agree with, that the MPs probably had coordinating procedures if they were responding to shots fired, that they had radios, you were coordinating, you understood what's going on. You've already talked about an increased level of training. I think it would be complicated if all of a sudden other individuals show up with long guns, and all of a sudden you have a significantly higher, uncoordinated, potentially challenge, and then you go back to the level of training. I was an aviator for 30 years. We had to qualify in the Marines annually with our weapons, both the handgun and the long gun. But that still is a lot of people to go back to that, don't shoot every year, so they have a level of qualification that kind of drops off. So I think that the risk is mitigated, in my view, through the current response force of MPs, highly trained, secondary response force, quick reaction, and then host nation or local civilian authorities is probably a better way to think about it than having a lot of weapons.
All right, and before we get a response from William here, and then we'll take a break after that, but I'm curious about what you would do regarding, let's say, reserve installations and guard installations and the like. I'll grant you that my time in the military was strictly dealt with the regular military, where there were, in my case, Army, military, police, always in any installation. Do we need better security, in your view, at reserve and guard facilities? I mean, the idea of hiring private contractors seems kind of odd to me.
Well, I think that I've only been on a few guard bases and only there normally for training. And then based on the mission sets we were doing, there was always some level of guard force. Now, I didn't know if that was the guards themselves, if there was an active component, because even on some of the reserve or guard bases, there might be an active component there as well. If that was provided, and I have seen on some of the front gates, contract support, so they bring in a company to provide that level of support. But again, it's integrated, well-trained defense capability.
Yeah. William, any thoughts you'd like to add before we take a break?
Just that I think that if a person displays or clears certain qualifications, I think people should be able to protect themselves. It's a Second Amendment right, and I know back in the ancient military days, everybody did carry their weapons around quite a bit. And I agree that everybody needs to be qualified on what they carry, and maybe the military should offer open day ranges for people that are qualified to carry on post.
Very good. Well, thank you, sir, for your service as well, William. 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. Retired Marine Colonel Mike Hudson, our guest. He is Senior Director at clearforce.com, and we'll be back with more in just a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show. 1-866-50-JIMBO, our number. Retired Marine Colonel Mike Hudson, our guest. He's now Senior Director of Government Solutions at clearforce.com. This is Vern in Ivanhoe, Minnesota. Good evening.
Hi, Jim. Enjoy your show, obviously, or I wouldn't be listening to it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I have a question for the good colonel there. I'll take the answer off the air. He's talking about all these reactionary forces and civilian police and all this other stuff. Could he explain Major Hassan shooting down in Fort Hood, how the reactionary force helped on that? Thank you. I'll take the answer off the air.
All right. I'm not sure how we would, quote, explain that shooting. Any thoughts that you have, I guess, Colonel?
Yeah, I mean, that was clearly a tragedy. This was a military officer. So someone who had access to weapon, bought his own weapons. So in essence, he didn't bring a service weapon. As my understanding, he was able to access and purchase weapons as any American civilian would.
Right.
And he brought those onto the base and then began engaging people. And he was eventually taken down by an armed response. So the challenge, I think, of any organization, and specifically in this case, the military, there's always a risk that someone on your team could act out violently. I think, again, the goal is, and even I think in the Hassan case, similar to the Pensacola case recently, is there were indicators in their lives that were missed or not correlated. The organization wasn't able to bring those in and see that. So part of it is, how do you react to the event that's ongoing, the shooter at that time? But is there something we can do differently by moving the sensors, the lenses at which we understand what's left, allow an organization to see it sooner? That's kind of where ClearForce is at. We think there's a way to have the conversation before it comes down to an active shooter environment.
Mm-hmm. This is Robert in Charleston, West Virginia on the Bohannon Show with Colonel Mike Hudson. Good evening, Robert.
Good evening, Jim. I just wanted to make a comment. I served as supplyman in Union Armor, and I think anybody who serves as Union Armor in the company is a competent person. They should be allowed to carry a firearm. I feel all the time.
Now, the armory, for those who don't know, that's the storage of weapons. But please proceed, Robert. I just wanted to get the non-military types up to speed. Go ahead.
Right, and I had over 300 automatic weapons in my little small container or room. And anyway, I think the military can easily, within any company, designate a person as a competent person to carry a firearm, and that person unit then could be trained on how to stop and prevent something like that that happened in Texas years ago.
My thoughts, Colonel Hudson.
Yeah, I think to Robert's point, that's another part of this defense in depth. So we talked earlier that on a military installation, you'll have the armed guard force at the front. You'll have the military police moving within the organization. And then your critical areas, in this case, the armory, of which there's probably more than one on some of these bases. There you have an individual that has a higher level of training, qualifies for the weapon more often, puts more rounds down. They're armed, right? You could find that at the duty officers are armed on military bases. So you go to each of the organizations, they'll have an armed duty 24/7, especially in the evening hours when the post are potentially is stood down, right? So I think that Robert's right. There will be armed individuals that have higher level of training around critical infrastructure that augment and have trained to coordinate with the military police to respond to a threat.
1-866-50-JIMBO. We go to Fred, who calls in from Pittsburgh tonight. And good evening, Fred. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, and thank you, both of you, for your service.
Thank you.
And I just had a comment or a question. After the first shooting at a military base, and I just happened to watch it. I guess that was that Fort Hood.
Well, are you talking about the shooting at Fort Hood?
Yeah, was that the first shooting at a U.S. military base?
I'm sure it's not the first one. I really haven't kept the chronology of all such shootings, but it was certainly the most recent prominent one. Maybe Colonel Hudson would know better. I don't know.
Well, the first one, just let me say the first one, I don't exactly remember.
Sure.
But I was watching the news, about it on TV, and after it was over, they said that President Clinton, when he was in office, banned all private firearms on military bases. Now, I don't know if your guest had heard that or know about that at all.
I don't know where the policy originated. Perhaps Colonel Hudson does, sir?
Well, I think I'd say two things to Fred first. There has been more than the shooting at the base. A Major Hassan shooting, I think, was in 2009, 2010. I mean, we just had the recent one down in Pensacola.
And Bill Clinton, of course, left office in 1999. So,
and you'll remember, Jim, we had that tragedy at the Naval Yard shooting there. A military base, in this case, a civilian bad actor with a security clearance got on and shot some people. Right, so it's happened in the past. I think military bases, companies, organizations, no one's really immune from an individual doing bad things. As to policy, I'm not familiar with the broad one. I know from my time that most of the bases I was on would have some level of immediate policy or orders that dictated who could carry a weapon and under what conditions.
Yeah. More to come. Back on the Bohannon Show in just a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show with our guest, Colonel Mike Hudson, retired from the Marine Corps, Senior Director at clearforce.com. You mentioned military suicides earlier, a subject that we've sort of discussed before on this program. And where do we stand right now as regards suicide, both by active duty personnel or by veterans?
Well, I think what you're seeing is there's been a lot in the open media recently about some of the efforts that both the VA and the DoD is taking out. As we talked about, there has been a rise in both, tragically, of active duty servicemen and women taking their lives, as well as veterans. So they've really tried to institute some new policies. And again, a lot of those are around early detection and around closing the gap where what we saw with the VA data, unfortunately, is like 70% of the individuals who took their lives weren't even talking to the VA. So they've really expanded outreach. And I think we're starting to, hopefully what we'll start to see is a change in that those numbers. But it's a little soon to tell. He just released the reports in the last several months.
Fair enough. Let's go to John. He calls in from Grand Forks, North Dakota. Good evening, John.
Yes, hi.
U.S. Army, 69 to 72. We
Thank
were
you for your
all
service.
assigned weapons. Well, yeah, fine. We were all assigned weapons, but they were always in a secured place. I have a hard time comprehending how someone can bring an arm on the base. I mean, that wasn't even a thought back then. What's changed is my question.
I know that when I was in the military, of course, I had a, quote, assigned weapon. It was in the beginning, in the very beginning, in basic, an M14. It was an M16 the rest of the way. When I was stateside after my tour in Vietnam, I did not have, and I quote, assigned weapon at all. However, going in and out of the base, I had the ordinary level of security. I showed my ID. I could get in and out. And this was a base where most of the personnel had a top secret plus clearance. Had I been of a mind to, I could have smuggled a trunkload of weapons into that base. I mean, so I see the question about security. Colonel Hudson, your thoughts on what John had to say?
Yeah, so I think to your point.
Not even a thought back then.
Well, no, but I mean, the thoughts change with changing circumstances. Once the threat exists, then people have to react to it. Colonel?
Yeah, I think that to John's point and yours, I mean, you are assigned a weapon. When I was deployed, I had one, and obviously when I was back stateside, I was also assigned one. In the Marines, we qualify every year, so I would qualify both on my 9mm and an M4, or M16 then M4. But you could, even today and back then, if you were a bad actor wanting to do bad things, and you wanted to somehow smuggle a weapon onto base, commit that crime, you could do that. There are checks and balances in there, discovery mechanisms, screening capabilities, technology to help us discover that. But still, if you're a bad actor dedicated to do bad things, you could smuggle a weapon potentially onto a base or try to get through the security to get that weapon on the base. And then we have
a point well taken. Again, times change, John, I guess would be the only subtext I could offer to that. Robert in Suffield, Ohio now, and good evening.
Good evening. I have a question for the Colonel. Just a few minutes ago, he made a statement that it's impossible to be immune from having bad things happen. But I would like to ask him, why are individuals being made to be immune of being able to protect themselves?
So I guess, I'll take a stab at that right off the bat. I mean, an individual, clearly, we see that today, just crime in America and anywhere, people can do bad things. A lot of that, we try to see the leading indicators, but people can just do bad things. To the point I think you're getting at is why everybody shouldn't have access to a weapon. But I think as I said earlier, I think part of that challenge is if you're a bad person going to do bad things, and oh, by the way, you also get to carry a weapon with you, you kind of what we'd call the flash the bang just got a whole lot smaller. But I think that on the military basis specifically, and even in society, I think having the appropriately trained, coordinated response is a way to go broadly. Is my view.
All right. Let's see here. Maybe we can get a really quick comment here from Murdoch in Raleigh, North Carolina. Murdoch, not a lot of time here.
Yeah, my question was the lack of response from the Shore Patrol. They basically called 911, and the Sheriff's Department came in and took care of the situation. And is that part of the Military Code of Justice that's kind of dealing with that, or what the heck's going on?
Suppose.
Real
please, very quickly, Colonel. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so I think that the thing is on this is, as I said earlier, built military bases coordinate with local law enforcement to make sure they have a coordinated response. It might have been faster for a police officer to drive onto the base to get to where the shooting was than it was for the QRF, Quick Reaction Force, or an armed response force at the base.
Fair
so
enough.
Again, whatever the fastest way is how they go about it.
All right, very good. Stay on the line. We'll speak off air. Retired Marine Colonel Mike Hudson from clearforce.com. This is Westwood One. Hello there and good evening and welcome to the Jim Bohannon Show from Westwood One Radio. We're at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. Online, you'll find us at JimBohannonshow.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Jimbo Talks. Well, the opening arguments for the Democrats prosecuting President Trump in the Senate trial have now concluded. The president's attorneys start their presentation later this morning, and Bob Costantini has a recap of the past day's events and a look ahead as the Trump team gets ready to take charge.
House Prosecution Manager Hakeem Jeffries arguing that when the president made the phone call to Ukraine's new president asking for favors, his aides became alarmed.
By July of 2019, White House officials were aware of serious allegations of misconduct by President Trump regarding Ukraine. But instead of halting the president's corrupt scheme, they worked overtime to conceal it from the American people.
That was weeks before the whistleblower complaint was filed and went public. The president's supporters claimed there was no demand in the asking, though at the time military aid was being withheld. Called a sleazebag by President Trump during the week, Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler are accusing the president of thinking he's above all law, not having to provide any of their requests for documents and witnesses.
He wants to be all-powerful. He does not have to respect the Congress. He does not have to respect the representatives of the people. Only his will goes. He is a dictator. This must not stand.
For Florida Republican Senator Rick Scott, the president didn't break any law in his dealings with Ukraine.
So I'm looking forward to the White House starting to set the record straight.
Democratic House managers used just about all the time they were allotted over 3 days. Lead Adam Schiff closing out with words aimed at the senators in the chamber.
And so I ask you, I implore you, give America a fair trial. She's worth it.
One of the president's lead attorneys, Jay Sekulow, wants his message to get out to voters.
I'm really trying to remove the president from the ballot in 2020. We are, 10 and a half months out from an election, and they don't trust the American people to make a decision. Tomorrow morning, we start our case, and we're going to put on, I believe, without question, a compelling case. As I said, we have two goals. We're going to refute the allegations that they've made, and we're going to put on an affirmative case as well.
As for the theme of the day, an obstruction of Congress accusation against the president, Sekulow adds you don't get penalized for exercising constitutional rights. Bob Costantini, Washington.
I would note a couple of things here as we take your phone calls at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. There is now an ABC News report that said that President Trump may be heard in a 2018 recorded conversation saying he wants to get rid of the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. So what? This is the kind of nonsense we've been talking about here. Ambassadors serve at the pleasure of the president. So what? I don't care if he spray painted it on the street in front of the White House. Maybe you can get him for vandalism if he did that, but you certainly couldn't get him for wanting to do what is entirely his constitutional right, has been the unchallenged constitutional right of every president in American history. Such utter nonsense. And perhaps the president misspoke when he called Jerry Nadler a sleazebag. He's an ignorant sleazebag, as shown by the comment about how he is a dictator. Really? Well, if he's a dictator, he's not a very good one. He's got his job on trial here before the U.S. Senate. A good dictator wouldn't let that happen. And one other thing I would note, the comments of Congressman Peter King, who said that Adam Schiff, in his view, has lost the right to be taken seriously. Just a quote from Congressman King. If anyone had lost the right to be taken seriously, it's Adam Schiff. He is the one who went 2 years talking about all of the solid evidence that he had, the concrete evidence of President Trump being involved in collusion with Russia. Turned out he had nothing. Adam Schiff has just become a shill for the Democratic Party. I served with him on the Intelligence Committee for, 7 years. The first few years he was actually a fairly reasonable guy, but the last few years he became extremely hostile, extremely partisan, extremely biased, and to me, he is not a very good face going for the Democrats. This whole case is a charade and a cruel hoax anyway. King, again, referring to his colleague in the Congress, Adam Schiff, asked what he wants to hear from Republicans. King says, I think the main argument should be the constitutional one, that nothing, assuming the very worst of all the things the Democrats have said about President Trump, that nothing has happened that would be impeachable. And I think that's a very valuable point. 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626, as we go to Kim in Shields, Michigan. Good evening, Kim.
Hi, Jim. Thank you.
Sure.
One quick thing, and then what I really called in about after that. I heard that Parnas tape on the news break, too, and I just heard a part of the clip, but it's like old news. It was a tape recording of President Trump, something saying about he wanted to get rid of Yovanovitch, get her out of the job.
Yeah.
And that's old news. I mean,
it is old news, and it's also non-news. Yeah. Hey, go ahead.
Yeah. She was backstabbing him, and Trump told his associates, he said she's bad news, can her. And she was an Obama appointee. But that's my short thing there. That's really old news. I don't care if Parnas hates it or not. It's old news. But what I called in about, the last few nights, you've had, usually in the third hour, you've had a bunch of your virulent, 3 or 4 of your virulent Trump haters call in, and they go out to lunch about ranting and raving about how Trump lied, how he said no soldiers were injured in Iraq and stuff. I just have a few questions, because I've been doing some looking on my phone and stuff. And the missile strike was the 8th. The stories didn't seem to start coming out till about the 16th, like 8 days later, that 11 were injured. Then by the 24th, 34 were injured, and they all had concussions, supposedly. But in addition to the heads up that the base got from friendly people in Iraq, our military also observed increased movement and activity in Iran, and they knew something was coming on, and that's why they had all the troops sent to the underground bunkers. But
well, we were warned by the Iranians. I'll put it this way: the Iranians warned the Iraqis on those bases. These were principally Iraqi bases, knowing full well that the Iraqis were going to tell the U.S. So yes, but go ahead.
So the question I have is, for one thing, one side note is if President Trump's not told that there's 8 or 11 or 34 concussions, how would he know if he's given the thumbs up, everything's okay? It's coming out like 8 and 16 days later. But my other question is, didn't the generals make sure that the troops at Al-Assad, the biggest one, and the smaller one, which I can't remember the name, didn't they make sure that they had aircraft with missiles? I know he's going to be sending in Patriot missile defense systems. Now, didn't they have anything to defend themselves that the generals didn't give them anything?
I don't know what was available in the way of defenses at those bases. Presumably, they felt that whatever defenses were available were sufficient. I don't know. I mean, I guarantee you they didn't send them in there and say, let's leave them vulnerable. They thought that sufficient forces were available, obviously. So
I just have so many questions, and they're blaming Trump. How can he know if they don't tell him?
Again, the president was told, he says that no troops had been injured. So the president passes that on. It's not exactly as though the president personally called the base in question. That's why they have a chain of command. The president's a little busy governing the largest, most powerful country in the world. So, I mean, again, if he was told something that was incorrect, then it was incorrect. But, of course, the previous comment made tonight about we were lied to was from somebody who will just automatically assume the worst. And that, of course, in and of itself, when we deal in that kind of tawdry accusations, tells you, I guess, all we need to know about that individual. So, there you go. So I see what you're saying, Kim. 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626 to David in Creston, Iowa. Good evening.
Good evening, Jim. Thanks for taking my call. When in the hell did it become illegal for a person to give their opinion?
Well, it's not illegal for a person to give their opinion. What do you mean exactly?
Well, they're telling Trump that he called made a statement about he'd like to get rid of the ambassador. So that's his opinion. What the hell is going on here?
Well, again, the Democrats want to find anything they can, and so they are more than happy to attack a president for exercising his prerogative. It wouldn't matter. Okay, he says that he didn't like the way the ambassador was serving. Okay, whatever. Let's assume that she was serving perfectly. Doesn't matter. If you are an ambassador, you serve at the pleasure of the president. If they don't like your hairstyle, if they don't like your eye color, if they don't like the way you look at him, that's a good enough reason. Presidents have absolute discretion to decide whatever they want to about such a person. And the idea that that's in any way crossed any line. See, what the problem is that there is a foreign policy establishment which tends to be rather liberal and rather vacuum-headed, and the president has crossed them. Well, I've got news for you. They don't set foreign policy. They think they do, and they certainly think they should, but they don't. And that's really why you've got people like Adam Schiff with their panties in a bunch, because the president isn't doing what the foreign policy establishment says he ought to. Well, I have a reply to that. Screw the foreign policy establishment. Presidents conduct foreign policy, not some collection of self-important idiots.
Well, we're all in trouble then if we make an appointment in a free society. I mean, our attitude and our comments, a freedom of speech. So much for Jim Bohannon's talk show, huh?
Well, no, you draw an extrapolation that could easily be drawn. Yeah, where would you draw the line? I think the point is well taken, David. 1-866-50-JIMBO is our number. 1-866-505-4626. But I'll put it this way: you might very well see a case of let's say President Obama had said something bad about an ambassador whose ideas of foreign policy were in agreement with me, and I didn't really much care for President Obama's policies. I might disagree with his thoughts, but the notion that he had somehow overstepped his boundaries is ludicrous. I would never suggest that in that instance President Obama was overstepping his powers. I mean, he's the president, and he gets to pick people who are ambassadors. And it's just a ridiculous argument. More to come. Back in a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626, as we have now arrived at the time for the Republicans to respond. I don't know how much time they will take. I hope that they don't feel the necessity of resorting to repeating themselves a dozen times or more. It certainly doesn't improve your persuasive case if you repeat the same inadequate points over and over again. It didn't certainly help the Democrats any. This is Steve in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Good evening, Steve.
Good evening, sir. How are you this evening?
I'm well, thank you.
And me too.
Great.
I wanted to thank you for your service, and I didn't get a chance to call in and thank the Colonel, but thank him also.
Thank you.
I wanted to just point out that ever since Donald Trump got elected, he's known that they've been after him. And he is not a stupid man. He did not get to where he is by being stupid. So he knew that they had it in for him. So he would not have done anything, I don't think, to give them any kind of inkling that they could do anything against him. It's just ludicrous to think that he would do that.
Fair enough. All right. I certainly, it was obvious, of course, to all that he was, in fact, he was a target before he even took office. So that was public knowledge public statements were made, and not just things that were revealed, but things were said publicly for attribution. Yeah, we're going to get him. And then they should be surprised that we think that is a case of prejudgment. If the president hasn't even had a 1 second in office, that tells you all you need to know about whether or not that president will be given a chance when there is talk of impeachment before he even takes the oath of office. Here's Sally calling in from near Olympia, Washington. Good evening.
Good evening. There's a verse in Proverbs, which is a book of wisdom, and I can't say it in King James, but it goes like this: any story sounds true until someone tells the other side. And I've used that a lot because I've told people, policeman doesn't go when there's an accident and he'll just talk to one person. He goes to the person who maybe got hit by the car, ran into the car, and bystanders. And then he makes his mind up and writes his report, okay? And then, too, my dad loved Paul Harvey, and I know he always said, and now for the rest of the story. So you know what? I cannot wait for the Republicans to have their chance in office, because I agree with you. You didn't say it this way earlier, but it's what I've been saying. The 2016 was a big loss for the Democrats. And that is why they're having this impeachment farce, in my opinion. And second, in 2020, that election is going to be a potential big loss, a landslide for it's going to be a loss for the Democrats, but a landslide for the Republicans. And who did they really want? The DNC. They have wanted Joe Biden all along. None of the other ones up there matter. Joe Biden. And I remember when Hillary Clinton was on the tarmac with Joe, I don't know what she said to him, but he hugged her and hugged her and hugged her. And I think that's, she was backing him, and as long as he made her vice president, because she wants to be president so badly. She feels entitled to be president of the United States. She wants to be the first woman president. And Joe, I don't know how much longer he's going to last, because, we all get old. And, I've lost both my parents, and I see the aging signs. How can you miss it? And she's not that good of health either. Do you remember the election before?
I recall there were questions about her health. That's true. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I mean, she was falling down and coughing and coughing and coughing, and she even has a double. They've shown the double. She looks 10 years younger than Hillary, but she looks a lot like her. Go ahead.
I was just going to say I had heard stories of the double, had never seen for sure that in fact one exists. I think that there is certainly a feeling within the Democratic Party that probably many of the establishment types would prefer Biden. He's comfortable. He's a known quantity. So that's probably true. On the other hand, I doubt very seriously if anybody at the DNC is prepared to take active steps to truly distort the process after what happened in 2016. That party is still smarting from what was later discovered to be the active gaming of the system against Bernie Sanders. And I'm no great fan of Bernie Sanders, but the fact is he got royally shafted. And again, fair is fair. And so we'll see. At the moment, Joe Biden doesn't seem to need any help from the Democratic National Committee until somebody actually starts beating him in the polls. And, of course, now in just a week from Monday, beating him, in that case, in the Iowa caucuses. It's going to be interesting, but the polling data now, the closer you get to an election, the closer we seem to have an answer. Biden, by Super Tuesday, could almost have this wrapped up. We'll see. More to come on the Bohannon Show in a moment. Glad you're with us on the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO. In just a few hours, we will have the Republicans' reply to the interminable Democrat opening salvo in the impeachment trial of President Trump. And again, when you have to say the same things over and over again, it probably says a lot about how strong your case is. And I've heard nothing new. And through this whole thing, as we go back to our calls here, I kept wondering, at every stage of the game, do they have something? Would you really put your butt out on the line that far? Does Robert Mueller have something about the president colluding with the Russians? Well, it turns out He didn't. Then this whole Ukraine thing, I kept wondering, do they have something? Do they have something? And do all the House impeachment hearings and the Intelligence Committee and the Judiciary Committee, I kept wondering, would they really go that far out on a limb with nothing? And then I kept wondering, well, maybe they're holding something back, even though I found that extremely unlikely, because if they had a real smoking cannon, that would have leaked. But I kept thinking, well, maybe they're holding it. They're holding it. They're holding it. And here we are in the trial. Nothing. They got nothing. And that to me is the most amazing thing, that they would come this far with nothing. Seriously, if I had been advising the Democrats with their best interests at heart, which I certainly don't have, but if I had been doing so, I would have said, look, vote censure. Vote censure. Nah, 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 we don't like you, Donald. And that would be it. Then you could go back to your constituents and say, well, we didn't have the votes to impeach and convict, but we voted censure. We called him bad names. That would have been the smart move. Impeachment was just so lame. And I'd like, by the way, right now to thank them for being so lame. Phil in Tri-Cities, Washington. Hello.
Good evening, Joe.
Good evening.
I'm just laughing. First of all, I do want to thank you, Jim. Every time I listen to your show, you raise my intelligence level. And it's just a treat to talk to you.
Thank you.
About someone that's being appointed at an embassy. Look, if we look back at Obama in 2008, after he was elected in December, before the inauguration, he gave all the ambassadors of Bush's cabinet Christmas gifts of pink slips. So let's be realistic here. If you want to look back, and the thing I think that's funny is Obama was worried in 2012 that Donald was going to run, because that's when he actually got the Make America Great Again phrase coined. So when he ran in 16, nobody had it. But he did that in 12. That's the first rumblings that I remember of Donald, being picked on. They started picking on him back then. Well, I just, that didn't even faze me. So the more they pick on him, the more I learn about what happened previously. It always makes me wonder, Jim, if these people are having such a fit over this, what's going on in the background? What's happening? Oh, the China deal, USMCA. Oh, come on. All these great deals that he's doing. He just came back from Davos, Jim. Didn't they call him the Davos man?
I don't recall what all they called him. Sometimes it's hard to remember all of the things that they did, in fact, call him, Phil. Thank you for your thoughts. 1-866-500-JIMBO. The thing I remember most about the idea of a Trump candidacy was how much it was derided, how much liberals said, oh, boy, is he really going to run? We can't wait. Well, didn't work out too well for him there, did it? 1-866-500-JIMBO to Bob in Mansfield, Texas. Good evening.
Good evening. It's Rob, actually.
Yes, it is Rob, and I stand duly corrected. I was told Rob, and I said Bob, so I am wrong.
I'm sorry. You're accurate 99.9% of the time on my book. I just wanted to comment on what we're hearing about people saying that Trump lied about the number of troops injured. The nature of the injuries speaks to the fact that he was truthful all along. I mean, if you're a football player, playing football, and you get piled on, if you at all possibly can, you get up and get back in the game. If you're a soldier who gets thrown around a bit because of a near miss of a missile, you're going to pick up your gun and look around, see if you can help to do your duty. It might be days before you start having nausea, passing out, headaches, and decide and figure out you get sent to the sick call and get added to the injury list, right? I mean, brain injuries don't show up immediately. I mean, the only way Trump would know that he had casualties if they were filling body bags that night.
Yeah, and again, he repeated what he was told, so it was a mistake.
Right.
But to automatically assume he was lying, I mean, there would be no motive to lie because it was going to come out anyway. I mean, again, he repeated what he was told. Presidents aren't.
It wasn't even.
Yeah, go ahead.
It wasn't even a mistake. I mean, like I said, You don't go report. If you're a soldier, if you're capable of picking up your gun, you go do it. You don't jump to the sick call right away.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, again, these can be symptoms that show up in a very delayed way, Rob, and you're absolutely correct. And again, that, of course, means nothing to people who are looking for any excuse to take a shot at the president. Here's Tom in Sharon, Pennsylvania. Hello.
Good evening, Jim. Hey, I want to point out, and you may have mentioned, I don't know, that Jim Lehrer passed away a couple days ago.
Yes, he did. A former guest on this show numerous occasions, and probably the greatest straight-arrow newsman I ever met.
That's what I was about to say, is that man, not only being a great American, was a true news person. And, you know, when I hear, just as with the last person said about the concussions and how everybody's jumped to conclusions, or another thing I heard today on the radio that all this stuff about Joe Biden has already widely been debunked. No, it hasn't been debunked. In fact, Peter Schweitzer just came out with a book.
Who's coming on this program in the near future, by the way.
Well,
I think it may be a week from tonight, I believe it is, that he's going to be on. So, but go ahead.
I'll be listening. Well, because Biden and 4 other members of his family, also how Bernie Sanders has manipulated money, and Elizabeth Warren has, manipulated the system. But my point is this: that I think it would be very helpful because Jim Lehrer, I could not tell if he was a Democrat or Republican. The man just asked news questions, and he didn't put an agenda to it. He'd have follow-up questions, but he wouldn't put an agenda to it.
No, ever. I interviewed the guy probably half a dozen times, and knew him in other circumstances. And I'll be, to this day, he went to the grave. I still don't know his affiliation. I do know this: he refused to even register to vote, because he felt that it could be used as a basis for undermining his integrity and his impartiality. I have never felt the need to take an electoral vow of celibacy, but he did.
What I'm saying is, I don't know how much footage is left of the interviews that he's done or the reporting that he's done, but whatever's there, I think needs to be cherished and given to universities and distributed to them, so that people who are studying journalism can learn what journalism is about and news reporting is about, and then also to the general public, so that people can see the difference between someone who is actually trying to find out truth and somebody who's just going after reinforcing their own agenda at whatever cost.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the tendency in that direction must have pained him greatly in later years. But points well taken, Tom. Absolutely. I was very taken personally by a gentleman I did have the privilege of knowing, Jim Lehrer, and a tremendous gentleman, Marine Corps captain, by the way. He loved buses. He had a collection of memorabilia about buses. In fact, he owned a bus. I suppose his widow still has a bus someplace on that property they own, someplace in, I think, rural Virginia. Anyway, more to come on the Bohannon Show as we do on a Friday night. Let's check in with that guy, Mighty John Marshall of MoneyMusic.com.
Hi, this is Mighty John, the record guy. One of the most prolific hitmakers of the 70s was Three Dog Night. They had 18 consecutive top 20 hits with several number ones, including Mama Told Me Not to Come. But to get a record worth money, they had to take off their clothes. How's that? Find out right after this.
Once again, Mighty John Marshall.
Mama told me not to come. Mama told me not to come. That ain't the way that I found. No.
The Three Dog Night album, It Ain't Easy, released by ABC Dunhill Records, had 2 different covers. One shows the group fully clothed and worth no more than $15. The other version pictures 3 vocalists, 4 musicians, and 1 unidentified girl, all nude. Joy to the world. That version can sell for $200 today. Find the value for any record at MoneyMusic.com.
Got to get John back on one of these days. Tremendous talent. Enjoy that guy. All right, to Octavia, who listens to us in South Texas. Good evening, Octavia.
Good evening, Jimbo. I called in the other day. I was driving to Missouri, and I got a little backlash for some family members about my no translating rant. So I'm supposed to call in and clear that up. I did say I'll call in, but I'm not clearing it up. I would actually like to say I would take it a step further and get rid of ESL also. Because if my child is failing or needs help in a subject in school, I have to pay for a tutor. So I think if their child needs help with a subject in school, they should pay for a tutor also.
Well, I don't know that. Is there a big issue with this? I mean, I think it would be helpful if the school systems made available tutorial help. Some school systems may not have the resources to do it. Is that a big issue out there that I have missed somehow? The question of whether extra help is made available for all students?
Exactly. It is a big issue. A lot of programs have been cut as far as after-school programs or just, any extra help a child needs. It has to come out of the parent's pocket. It's the parent's responsibility. And I get it, but we're not cutting other programs.
No, I don't certainly want other programs to be cut, but I would certainly say this, that anything we can do to bring up to speed those who are not doing as well. I mean, the people who don't do well in school usually wind up dragging us down in other ways and themselves. They don't get decent jobs. They wind up being publicly dependent. Sometimes they turn to a life of crime. So I would be in favor of anything we can do to bring people up to speed. All right, 1-866-50-JIMBO, and to Steve in Angier, North Carolina. Good evening.
Hey, Mr. Jimbo. I don't know what the Republicans' lawyers will do till it takes place, but I think a good place to start would be to start off with just the credibility of Adam Schiff, because I've been listening to him carefully, and he is either out and out lied or stretched truth so many times, and by doing so, he's to Trump's attorneys to go into those subject matters. I mean, when he brings up, Adam Schiff is still saying that the Russians cheated and won Donald Trump the election. When the Mueller report says that they did try to influence the election, but the Mueller report says it had no definite bearing, the best they could tell, on the outcome of the election.
That's correct. That they tried, yes. That they succeeded, there's no evidence whatsoever, and there's no evidence whatsoever that at any point the Trump campaign was trying to help them, which was the basis of the charge.
And he keeps using the word cheat, that they would probably help him cheat this time. And he was trying to get the Ukrainians to help him cheat in the election by going after Joe Biden. And he even solicited the Chinese to help him cheat to win the election. And then, like you said a while ago, he's opened the door to the whole Mueller report, when all they got to do, credibility-wise, is remind him, like you just said an hour ago or something, Adam Schiff had all this great information. He was going to tell us about collusion. Swore as the truth that he did. Where's it at?
At the core here, you're talking about a very obsessed individual who is very desperate and who probably in his heart of hearts knows that he is in deeper than he can swim, that he didn't really have a case. But again, this is a person who is just bound and determined to, quote, to get the president, and I don't find him terribly persuasive, honestly. More to come. We'll be back in a moment. Dr. Joseph Devlin is a professor of cognitive neuroscience at University College of London. He set out to discover if watching a movie can have health benefits.
Physically, you're not doing much, right? But of course, you get engaged with the film, and there's this kind of narrative arc that gets you more or less excited, and you can see that in people's heart rates.
They hooked up volunteers to measure their heartbeats and galvanic skin responses as they watched the 2019 live-action Disney film Aladdin. Now, granted, they were just sitting there.
It's not the same as being on a treadmill or anything.
But still,
I don't recommend people give up their gym memberships and just spend the time in the movies. But there are some benefits to getting your heart into that sort of healthy heart zone that's defined as about 40 to 80% of your maximum heart rate.
Like 45 minutes of a brisk walk, and movies provide an escape from technology.
One of the nice things about being in a movie is that you are essentially distraction-free, and that just doesn't happen that much in our lives anymore. You know, with social media and your cell phones and all the various communication channels, all of that gets turned off, and you sustain attention for, 2 hours or however long the film is.
In this shared experience,
when we look at people's heart rates who are just in the cinema who are strangers to one another, you start to see that they synchronize at various points in the film.
If a romantic flick like Aladdin can do this, imagine what some scary adrenaline pump movie can do.
If you're going to do cheap thrills in terms of horror or slasher, then of course you're going to get these great heart rate peaks that are very easy to see.
The British researchers also found it's easier to spot the peaks for those watching a movie, which don't require all of your attention for 2 or 3 hours.
There are times when you can step back and be less engaged with the film, and then times where there's more. And it's that up and down process that actually makes it more engaging and makes it a more fun narrative.
Well, the fun narrative of the up and down process is perhaps best achieved by watching something R-rated. The Offbeat. I'm Jim Bohannon. As we take another call or two here on the Bohannon Show, starting with Wally in Sioux City, Iowa. And Wally, thank you for joining us tonight.
You're welcome, Jim. I was just remembering, in 1980, Ronald Reagan had a slogan that he ran with for president that was, "Let's make America great again." And that's, and except for the let's, Donald Trump used that same slogan, virtually the same slogan, in Make America Great Again in 2016. And
okay,
I've seen a lot of stuff that says that Trump admired Reagan.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Are you suggesting that that President Trump should give credit to Ronald Reagan for the slogan? I mean, yes, I know that Reagan did in fact use that slogan in 1980, but I don't know that there was ever any copyright attached to it.
No, that caller a while back said that suggested that he had to wait a while, and I don't know whether a campaign slogan could be copyrighted. If it could, I think Trump figured that he best get another campaign slogan copyrighted as well.
Yeah, I doubt that they can. I doubt that they can be copyrighted. Point well taken, and appreciate your thoughts and all of our callers. We're at the point where we're about to wrap things up here, so just wanted to take note of the fact that we'll continue to have more coverage on Monday night of the impeachment process, such as it is, and we'll have other things as well. We're not going to certainly beat it to death, as it were. Thanks you for joining us tonight. Our producer and webmaster is Kathy Johnson. We're at JimBohannonShow.com. And Josh Svets handles engineering chores on a Friday. This is Westwood One.